Hi. I'm prone to saying how things are going. Right here in Florida, it's a beautiful day. That's because we have the right governor. Some people think. Maybe it's not that. The argument between liberals and conservatives who hate each other will be solved. Do you know who will solve it? Anyone? Anyone?
The Antichrist.
The Antichrist. He's on his way, folks. All of that fighting in behalf of the liberals or the conservatives is a waste of time. There isn't one side on God's side and the other on Satan's side. The annual convention of conservatives took place this week, and it's the blind leading the blind. Be very careful. Now, we're going to pray in a moment, but I wanted to say hello first. I've mentioned at times that my friend Ray, who's producing this series, is right over here to my right, and he has agreed to be on camera finally. Ray, how you doing? There he is, doing his engineering thing. Thank you, Ray. That wasn't much of a presentation, was it? And my longtime friend Reg is over here, and he's looking dapper as usual.
Why, thank you, sir.
Did you go outside today?
A little bit.
Yeah, it is glorious out there.
Beautiful day.
I like these summer, winter days. All right, now I'd like to pray for us in this endeavor here, and you who are listening and those who are going to be listening. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we count it a privilege to come before you. We ask that in our study of the Word, that your Spirit would be present with us and with the hearers who are present and the hearers who will come in the future. And we ask that special blessing in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, we have a slide up here. Let's take a look at it. This is Act 4. And we had first Scene 1, the war between the woman and the dragon. Scene 2, we're going to look at today. The imperial beast rises from the abyss. That's chapter 13, verses 1 to 10. And that's not all there is in chapter 13. This is definitely one of my favorite sections. And certainly, this is going to be one of my favorite presentations. Scene 3, the Antichrist beast rises from the earth. Also Revelation 13, verses 11 to 18. And there, in those few verses, there is a ton of important stuff that drags together images from all over the book of Revelation and all over the Bible. So let's begin. Here we go. The last sentence in chapter 12 is in the wrong place. It has to be added to this. And he, the dragon, stood on the sand of the sea. Some manuscripts read, I stood on the sand of the sea. It's not John who's standing on the sand of the sea. Where is John? Where is John at this point? He's still in the throne room. He's still in heaven. And I saw a beast. Why does he see this stuff on earth? Because of the crystal clear sea? It looks like a sea, right? Like a nice, quiet sea. I saw a beast coming up out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads. That should remind you of the dragon. And we're not going to find out until we get to chapter 17 why the beast and the dragon look like each other. But we'll get there. With 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it, the dragon gave his power, and his throne, and his great authority. All right? So now we're in Act 4, Scene 2. We see here a chimera that is an imperial beast. We know it's an imperial symbol because each of the great empires of Daniel 7, one after another, are represented here. The imperial beast is an amalgam, but it is not any part of these former empires. Rather, it is a new empire with elements of each of its four predecessors in it. It draws from all of them, but it is not a revival of any of them. What it takes from them is evil. Now, I should mention this here. Revelation mentions the dragon first, and then it mentions a leopard, and then it mentions a bear, and then it mentions a lion. What do you notice?
It's backwards.
It's backwards. That's right. It's backwards. It's the exact opposite of the way it is presented in Daniel, and that's not accidental. That's called an inclusio, meaning this here is the end product of that over there, and you are supposed to relate them to each other. The order is not accidental here. You have to watch out, as Randy keeps saying, you have to watch out for the words, the grammar, the syntax. You have to watch it all. All right? There's the Neo-Babylonian lion, the Medo-Persian bear, the winged leopard of the Greeks, and the great dragon Rome. Each of these wild beasts, as claimants to earthly rule, was rejected by God. The only one who could rule the earth on God's behalf was the heavenly Son of Man, which is a human being. And that's Jesus. When Jesus referred to himself as the Son of Man, he did that because they couldn't say he was saying he was the Messiah. But on the other hand, it's not a term for an earthly ruler. There is a term for an earthly ruler who is the Messiah, and that is what? The Son of God. He was the son of David, and God says in his covenant with David that I will adopt him, he will become my son, and I will become his father. Son of God is an earthly term. The king on David's throne who rules the world on behalf of Christ. Son of Man is a heavenly term, the one whom the Ancient of Days gives authority to rule the world. I know it's exactly opposite the way people think. Yep, but that's the reality, okay? The particular elements of the imperial beast duplicates is speed of rise and conquest, the leopard, ability to maul and destroy its enemies easily, the bear, blasphemous claims, Babylon, and satanic power, the dragon. These elements that were individually notable in the classical empires all are present with the power in the imperial beast. The ancient Christians would have recognized this easily. Another term that historicists have long used for the imperial beast is the leopard beast. That's been around for centuries. But it's not a leopard beast. If we go down that road, the correct way to speak of it would be the dragon, leopard, bear, lion beast. And that would still miss the basic point that it is an imperial power. And that power was directly derived from Satan. Lately, some historicists have started calling this the water beast or the sea beast, which still misses the essential point that just as the dragon came down from heaven, the imperial beast rises from the depths of the underworld to meet and coalesce on the earth plane, alas. Now we hear, one of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. I'm going to tell you shortly that the mortal wound has not yet been healed. It was not healed in 1929. It wasn't inflicted in 1798. That was a belief that was perfectly fine at the time that it was developed, because that's what the Holy Spirit told people to think. Right? The Holy Spirit directed people to Revelation and gave them things that would tell them that the coming of Christ is about to happen. That's what I mean when I talk about the 2-minute warning. There's nothing wrong with that interpretation, except that we know better than that now. The Spirit has moved beyond. How do we know so much more? Because the Holy Spirit directed in the development of the things that we now understand. The whole ancient world did not exist in 1798 when this interpretation was made, and it does exist now. Not all of it, but enough of it for us to have a completely different understanding. This is alleged to be the papacy, but it's not the papacy. Supposedly, if we turn the 1,260 days, 1260 days for the second half of the week into years, we get the period of papal rule. Not so, for three reasons. One, the papacy did not rise to temporal power in AD 538. What are you saying? Well, that's been taught for, really, for 150, 200 years. The papacy did not die in 1798, but grew stronger. As we'll discuss, I'm going to show that these things I'm saying are true. 3, there was no mortal wound. The papacy grew stronger in 1798. There was no mortal wound to heal. Chapter 17 will explain more about the imperial beast. We're going to have to wait. Well, I'm not going to say everything today because we're going to wait until we get to chapter 17 to say what it tells us there. There's a reason why Revelation was written the way it was written. Briefly, let's discuss the facts, the fictions that historicists use to support them. The claim that the imperial beast is the papacy. Long before 538 AD, the bishops of Rome enjoyed political rule and extensive and growing earthly power. The popes sometimes enjoyed great power, even challenging and ordering around various emperors of the Holy Roman Empire, right? The fifth of the great powers after Rome. Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, the Holy Roman Empire. Oh, the Byzantine Empire struggled along, but it was never in control of Christianity the way the Holy Roman Empire was. Here's a story you may have heard about. You may have heard how Pope Gregory VII made the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry IV, wait in a blizzard for 3 days, shoeless and only wearing a hair shirt, to hear his plea. Well, that was certainly arrogant in showing the Pope's power. But one thing we know about the Holy Roman Empire is that power teetered back and forth between the popes and the emperors. Okay? There never was a papal Rome. The Holy Roman emperors would have been surprised at that. There never was a papal Rome. That's a 19th century fiction. All right, so you've heard this story. Here's the emperor standing in a blizzard, freezing to death, waiting for the Pope to grant him absolution and remove his the fact that he had been disenfranchised. You weren't told that most of the time the Holy Roman emperors were quite independent of papal interference. You weren't told that. Henry eventually came after the Pope for payback. This is the part you don't know about. When Henry invaded Rome, Gregory had to flee for his life. And Gregory died in exile. Oh, I wasn't told that part. Among the many popes who died in exile. And the papacy didn't die each time a pope went into exile. Okay? So, what did not happen in 1798? Despite the claim of the atheist regime in France, they did not put an end to the cult of Catholicism. Look, they thought it was over. The rest of the world accepted that. The Christians who were studying the Bible accepted it because it was the 2-minute warning. They had by then a whole bunch of stuff that implied that the Christ was about to come. The world was about to end. This was a big deal. And so when the French Directorate, most of whom were themselves eventually beheaded, said they had put an end to the cult of Catholicism, the folks who were studying about the second coming of Christ thought it was true. However, what happened was the next duly elected Pope, Pope Pius VII, now who was the guy again who was carried away to France? Pope Pius VI. Got it? So it turns out that Catholicism wasn't mortally wounded. What did they do in response to the carrying away of the Pope? He died in exile. They elected another Pope. That's not a mortal wound. The popes, but this Pope, the Pope we're talking about here, Pius VII, won the controversy with France and retained the sole right to appoint priest, bishop, and cardinal. the directorate wanted to have complete control of the Roman Church, and it would appoint who would be priests, who would be bishops, who would be cardinals. But in the year 1803, the Gallican Treaty was signed, and the Pope won all of that right that he'd always enjoyed. Napoleon did not win that round, and it made him mad. Well, eventually, you know, by 1814, Napoleon lost the Napoleonic Wars, was taken captive and sent to the island of Elba, where he was exiled. Well, you know, there was a strong reaction against the Bonapartes. All over Europe, people wanted to kill the entire Bonaparte family. But this Pope, Pope Pius VII, said no, even though Napoleon had imprisoned him in a dungeon for 5 years, from 1809 to 1814. For 5 years, this man was imprisoned in a dungeon by Napoleon. He said that we should not be killing the Bonaparte family because of him. He also showed his concern as a Catholic Pope that the former emperor in exile should have a priest to confess his sins to. As far as Pius VII was concerned, he had committed a lot of sins and he needed a confessor or he was going to burn in hell. All right? This Pope also made an activist push to make Catholicism in America a great power. And he signed concordats, that's agreements, that's a treaty, with every major European Protestant country, saying that Catholicism would henceforth be considered a legal religion, which made him one of the great popes. Now, wait a minute. I thought there was a mortal wound in 1798. This is what happened immediately thereafter? Oh, no. This all happened when the papacy was allegedly dead. Pius VII's predecessor died in exile a year later. He was taken captive in 1798. He died in 1799. In 1800, the conclave met. What took them so long? His papacy began in 1801. Now, there was a rule. The reason it took a little while was twofold. One, if a pope died in exile, you didn't want to rush to elect another pope. Maybe you would elect an anti-pope. You don't get a new pope until you're sure the old pope is dead. So if the story is that he died in exile, you better go check and make sure he's really dead. Bring his body back to Rome and bury him with the rest of the popes. Make sure he's dead. And then, canon law says, you have to wait 6 months to be sure. Okay? So, this wasn't a big deal. They were doing what canon law said to do. And the other thing was that Napoleon, at this point, in the early 1800s, wanted to destroy the Holy Roman Empire. And the Habsburgs, who were the current controller of the Holy Roman Emperorship, wanted one guy, and Napoleon wanted the other guy. Guess who won? Napoleon won. This Pius VII was his man, he thought. But I said this about to Donald Trump about what happens when you name Supreme Court justices to a lifetime position from which they can't be removed. You may think you've got that person in your pocket, right? But wait till he gets into that position, and then you'll see. I just told you, this Pope won the Gallican Treaty Wars. Napoleon did not retain the right to control Catholicism in France. And I'll tell you why he won. Most Frenchmen were Catholics. There weren't many Protestants because they had killed all the Protestants in the St. Bartholomew Massacre. And those that survived left. Right? But the average person was a Catholic, and you can't get married, you can't die and be blessed, you can't be buried with the church, you can't baptize your children, right? So all of you are doomed to hell as far as their Catholic beliefs were concerned. And how did the folks like that? Napoleon recognized that the vast majority of his people were unhappy, to put it mildly, and wanted this settlement made. So Napoleon, wanting to solve this so he could get on to his great goals, gave up. That's where the Gallican Treaty came in 1803. Obviously, the papacy was not dead. Now let's look at the third paragraph. This was all happened when the papacy was allegedly dead. Pius VII's predecessor died in 1799. In 1800, the conclave met. His papacy began in 1801. Some mortal wound. The Diocese of Kentucky, the Diocese of Boston, the Diocese of New York, the Diocese of Philadelphia were added to the single Baltimore Diocese in this Pope's reign. Let's look at some. You've heard of Notre Dame, right? Well, I should hope so. You may not have known, but we know it, the College of the Holy Cross in Massachusetts, also a great Catholic university, did a lot of research in their library. Fordham University in New York, Boston College in Brookline, which isn't a college, but a great Catholic university, 1863, all founded and licensed by popes during this non-existent mortal wound. Does that sound like the papacy was dead? Pope after pope ensured that we, right, they encouraged Catholics to emigrate to the United States. They wanted that Catholic population to grow, and it did, because without the lack of birth control, you had a lot more children, right? Mm-hmm. So, in the second half of the 19th century, Catholicism became what has been about steady ever since. About 20% of the population self-identifies as Roman Catholic. Well, you would say 20%, that's not much. Yeah, but it's a voting block. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, if you have a voting block, even you have even Catholics who are black Catholics, right? All right, let's see what it says next. The power of the papacy in the modern era was cemented by Pius VII, the immediate successor of Paul VI, when no such thing as a deadly wound occurred. Moreover, oh no, don't tell me this, the Papal States. What are the Papal States? This is the rest of the story that you weren't told. Do you understand, Ray? Yeah. The Papal States, were most of the central portion of Italy, were still ruled by the popes after 1798. I thought temporal rule, temporal meaning earthly rule, ended in 1790. No, it didn't. Were still ruled by the popes after 1798 until the papacy ceded them for the unification of Italy in 1870. Well, that's 72 years later. In fact, the Papal States were controlled by huge armies, and the Pope reigned over them as a temporal prince from the great palace that the bishops of Rome ruled from as kings of the Papal States and had since the 1500s. Virtually no Protestant knows what the Quirinal Palace really is. Now, the Quirinale, Italian spelling, was given to the new Italian government, but a huge fortune was paid by the new state to the papacy. It took a while until 1929, but eventually the Italian government itself eventually did cave on the so-called Roman question, and that was, are the popes independent temporal rulers? Is the Vatican City a separate state, not subject to the Italian government because it's a different country? The Pope said, that's what's going on here, all the way from 1870 to 1929. That's 59 years. Every Pope said, nope, Vatican City is an independent state over which we rule as temporal rulers. What happened in 1929 was that the King of Italy told his young Prime Minister, Benito Mussolini, to solve the Roman question. All right? So everyone came to agreement that since at least the 3rd century, The popes have been temporal rulers in an unbroken line. According to the Lateran Treaty there in 1929, the popes were ruling over an independent state, and it always had been independent from 1870 onward, and so there was never a time when the popes were not temporal rulers. The popes ruled the papal states with an iron fist from AD 756 to 1870, over 1,000 years, when the last of the papal states fell under the army of the new state of Italy. However, temporal rule began with the patrimony of Rome, all the houses, churches, land, and estates the Roman Christians donated to the Roman Church as early as the 3rd century. By the time of Constantine in the early 4th century, the gifts were real. The Lateran Palace, for instance, we'll show it in the next slide, was a gift to the Roman Church, and Pope Sylvester, he received it on behalf of the Church. It's still there, next to the Basilica of St. John in Lateran, the Cathedral Church of the city of Rome. The Basilica of St. Peter's is not the church for the Roman city. That's St. John in Lateran, next to the Lateran Palace, which had been the Pope's palace since the time that Constantine gave it to them. Okay. Later, the popes would use the Quirinal Palace until vacating permanently, after losing the papal states, to the Vatican properties, St. Peter's Basilica, the Papal Palace, and its related buildings. But by far the most luxurious was the Quirinal Palace. This particular palace was where the Pope ruled as a temporal ruler, running the papal states, at least until 1870. The much earlier Lateran Palace, this is the first one, a gift from Constantine to the Pope. Papal rule, whether temporal or spiritual, began long before 538 and continued unabated after 1798. The Lateran Palace, that's the thing on the left, and the thing on the right is the Cathedral Church of the city of Rome. The Lateran Palace was a gift of the Emperor Constantine to Pope Sylvester in March of AD 315. What does that do to 538?
Out the window.
That's 223 years earlier. Okay. Why would Constantine give the Pope a great palace? What was Constantine about to do? Oh, Bueller? Does any of you out there in YouTube land know the answer to this question? What did Constantine found? He founded a city called Constantinople,
now known as Istanbul.
Istanbul, in Turkey, which was going to become the new capital of the Roman Empire. Right? Well, what about wouldn't there have to be some kind of authority in the Western Roman Empire? Yeah. Who did that authority naturally settle upon? Upon the popes, of course. Right? It isn't that Emperor Theodosian made the Pope his co-ruler in 538. That was done in 315. Constantinople was founded. Constantine did not come back to Rome. All right? That was it. The popes were expected to be in lockstep with the emperor. Right? Here's the Quirinal Palace, which the Bishop of Rome used to rule the papal states as their temporal ruler from the early 1500s to 1870. It sits atop the highest of Rome's 7 hills. That tells you something, right? Yeah. So, and we saw some pictures of this. I didn't put them in here, of the magnificent interiors of this palace. Oh, and the obelisk. The obelisk is from Tutmosis III. Who is Tutmosis III? The Pharaoh of the Exodus. Do you remember, folks? I'm presuming that you out there in YouTube land remember that that was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. And there his obelisk is, right by the Pope's palace. Right? Okay. And very appropriate that it should be there, right? And by the way, what is this enormous edifice used for today, since the popes vacated it in 1870? It's the palace of the President of Italy. False teaching is problematic in two ways. One is that a false tradition is false, period. It serves Satan's purpose. God does not push falsehood. Second, it masks the real meaning in Revelation of the imperial beast that had a mortal wound to one of its 7 heads. Revelation 17 tells us which head and why it got a mortal wound. There are very important reasons why that happened. With the historicist teaching, the real meaning is hidden from readers. The same is true of the now popular dispensationalist teaching. The mortal wound healing is a contemporary event. That means it's now that each believer should know about and understand. We'll get there when we get to chapter 17. Have I mentioned how hard it is to change a religious tradition once it has taken root? I think I said that once before. I'm being ironic. One important point before we leave this topic. I can even read the words that I wrote. Oh, did you write this? I did. By the time we get here, it's over. In 1870, one of the major figures of papal history, Pope Pius IX, this is a person you should remember. Pope Pius IX was on the papal throne. Remember Pope John Paul II? He's 2 popes back from us. This was his favorite pope. He was already a saint, or John Paul would have made him a saint over again. He was the longest known papal reign. Now there's something about long reigns. We said this when we talked about Tutmosis in his 54 years. When you've been ruling for a long time, people just see you as the great power, right? If I say the Queen, who do you know I mean? I do not mean Victoria, right? Ask around the world. If you say the Queen, the great Queen, who would it be? It would be Elizabeth. Of course. She reigned for 70 years. Most of the people who are alive came into existence when she was the queen. Right? You could see that this was an emotional deal in Britain. People could not imagine life without her, right? She was enormously popular. Well, that happens if you're it, with nobody else against you. It happened to Tutmosis, it happened to Ramses II, it happened to Louis XIV, it happened to Pius IX. He was the one who called the First Vatican Council in 1868. There was a Second Vatican Council called by Pope John the 23rd in the 1960s. The reason it was the second was because this one that was called in 1868, it was still in session in 1870. The real object of the council was to force the cardinals to debate and accept his new doctrine of papal infallibility in regard to teaching and doctrine. No medieval pope had ever dared or imagined he could promote such a doctrine. Pius IX, already on the throne for over 24 years at that point, had promoted most of the existing cardinals. And now he insisted they repay him. I'm telling you, none of the great popes, Innocent III never thought he could name himself infallible. Right? In some cases, he, Pius IX, had to remind the cardinals that he knew where they lived. Many had families in the Papal States, which he had not yet ceded to Italy. He implied that if necessary, they would be harmed if the cardinals did not vote infallibility. He put his foot, his right foot, on the throat of one of the cardinals who wasn't so far known to be in favor of voting the right way. Okay.
It's one way of getting democratic
That is,
rule and
yes.
approval. Yeah.
Yes, he knew how to do this. He implied that if necessary, they would be harmed. So he called a vote on infallibility. Of course, he didn't call for a vote until he knew that it was going to pass, and it passed. The highest point of papal authority ever imagined came at a time that historicists foolishly claim still. There was nothing wrong with the claim when it was 1798 and you didn't know better. That the papacy was dead, having suffered a non-existent mortal wound. I've already said, this takes away from what the real mortal wound is, and why it happens, and how it heals. Right? That's why we're spending so much time on this. Getting back to where we were, one of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but the mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed after or behind the beast. Everybody's behind him. If you're only a quarter awake, you can figure out which head will have the mortal wound. Long before we get to Revelation 17. Can you figure it out?
I believe 6.
6, of course. But 5 have fallen, 1 is, and 1 is yet to come, it says in chapter 17. 5 heads have fallen, 1 is, and 1 is yet to come. But it also says the beast doesn't exist during this period, so we know it's the 6th head. We need to know when the mortal wound was given, when it heals, why, and what to expect as a result. I have said it's a contemporary event. It's happening now. You need to know this. If you think the papacy is going to rule China at some point, you're going to miss what is really going to happen as Antichrist rises. That's because historicism and, to a certain extent, dispensationalism thinks of the papacy as the Antichrist. But that's okay. Dispensationalists will embrace Catholicism, reaching the hand across the abyss to grasp the hands of the Roman power. The Protestant reformers naturally assumed and taught that the Pope, or one of them, was going to be the Antichrist. That was already taught. There was a difference of opinion on the specifics. Well, why? Because when Joachim wrote his commentary on Daniel Revelation and published it in 1198, he said that an evil emperor and an evil pope are going to conspire, and that's going to be how the Great Tribulation comes about. Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing great about the papacy. It's an evil power. It is an antichrist. It is antichrist. It absolutely is. It substitutes for Christ's heavenly ministration the ministration of its earthly priests. It makes the Pope equal to Christ. It makes the priest so great he can recreate the body and blood of Christ in the Mass. Not as a symbol, but in reality. All right? Certainly, the papacy is and always has been an antichrist, period. Don't misunderstand what's being said. John tells us that already in his day there were many antichrists. While the papacy and the popes are an antichrist, they are not, or he is not, the antichrist. Now when he comes, he will have the great approval of the papacy. There'll be like no distance between them. Right? You won't be able to get a knife in there between what the papacy says and what the Antichrist says. So, but nevertheless, the Antichrist is someone who comes in the role of Christ and controls the whole world. The papacy is not going to control the whole world. Well, it can, by virtue of its relationship to the great Antichrist. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshipped the beast, there means prostrated themselves, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight or wage war against it?" Wow, that's an interesting attitude. There's no point in trying. This beast, this imperial beast, is going to win. There's a sense here that nothing on earth could overcome the imperial beast. Especially true after having a mortal wound and coming to life again, a false resurrection. The reappearance of an imperial power that succeeds in dominating every nation and person on earth lends credence to their amazement, astonishment, and ultimately their worship. Is there any imperial power that dominates every nation and person on earth at this time?
No.
No. There is not. Okay? Well, we had Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, the Holy Roman Empire. How long did the Holy Roman Empire last? When did it go away? Who killed it? I've told you several times already. Napoleon killed it, right? Yeah. So that was, let me see now. That was when he crowned himself Emperor of the French and therefore Emperor of Europe. In 1809, this was an interesting story. He asked Pope Pius VII to leave Rome and come up to Paris and crown him as Emperor of the French. Okay, so Pius VII did so. Now we're in the ceremony. The Pope is there and he's about to place the imperial crown on Napoleon. Well, he should. He was Napoleon's candidate. The guy who the Habsburgs wanted to be Pope is still back in Rome. What did Napoleon do? He snatched the crown out of the hands of Pope Pius VII and put it on his own head. He made it clear, no, Pope is making me emperor. Who's making me emperor? I am. And it was a trick. He was still seethingly angry that he had lost so much in his bouts with Pius VII. So what did he do? He didn't let him go back to Rome. He took him prisoner and put him in a dungeon. Right? When was Napoleon finally put down? Well, the last of the Napoleonic Wars. When, remember Nelson? How he finally beat, Napoleon was sick. He had the flu. He was barely able to sit up. He lost the battle, and it was the key battle, and he lost the war. He was taken prisoner. And then there was the Great Congress of Vienna, where the nation-states of modern Europe were realigned, and modern Europe came into existence. And this is the way they wanted it to stay. And it's remarkable. They made that in 1814, and it broke down in 1914. It was 100 years with no international wars. We can't even imagine such a time. What? Right? What do you mean they had no international wars? I mean they had no international wars. Right? Whether we say it or not, we are in a state of war with Russia. Is that understood?
Yeah.
And we are close to being in a state of war with China. All right? And all those NATO countries that are aligned with us also understand that we're on the edge of a state of war. Right? And we're already fighting. Right? Using a client state to fight a war is common. You go back through history, and that's the thing how wars begin. Right?
It just hasn't been declared, but it will be soon.
Well, The current president, we have to pause. The last two presidents have really been something else, right? You have to credit them for being somewhere beyond the pale of anything that we've ever seen in presidents before. Mr. Biden is very pleasant compared to Mr. Trump, but he's equally dangerous. The pleasantness is almost a kind of deception.
Oh.
He isn't going to say that scumbag woman has a horse face, right? He's not going to say that. He tells people to be a gentleman. But he made the mistake because he tends to make mistakes when he's speaking. And that may be a result of his mental state. There obviously is something not quite right there. Well, there's something not quite right with Mr. Trump too, people. There isn't a side that's on God's side here. He said that he was very dismayed because Russia had a great natural gas pipeline going to Germany. And now they had built another one. Well, when you built a second one, what does that mean? What are we expecting? Are we going to sell the same amount of natural gas to Europe? Twice as much, right? And Mr. Biden said, no, that's not going to happen. We will stop that. We know how to stop that. We will stop that. He was very emphatic about it. Who owns those pipelines? Russia owns them. They mysteriously exploded, both of them, rendered useless. They had to turn the gas off very quickly in Russia, so it wasn't bubbling up in the North Sea. Now, of course, it's a great mystery who blew up those.
Oh, yes, and of course the fingers are pointed at everyone else except the real culprit.
Well, here's what the United States officially says. Russia, knowing that Europe was going to become independent of its energy, blew pipelines up to make us look bad. Right? Russia blew the pipelines up to make us look bad. Putin blew up those pipelines himself. Well, why did you say it was never going to happen and we know how to stop it? Those were your exact words, several months before this happened. Oh, that's right, you had some war games up there with our allies right in that area. And so you had our people all over the area with the pipelines underneath, right? People who were experts at underwater demolition were right there. Yeah, but it didn't happen till months after our war games were over. Well, duh. Shall we blow them up while we're there?
Oh, dear.
You know, Mr. Putin is, what should I say? He's beside himself with rage. And he's not, mentally, he's not well. Physically, he's not well. Do you understand why the United States drives him nuts? And he's not rational? He's convinced. Look, I begged you from the early 90s on not to get NATO any closer to me. Now you got Poland. I share a border with NATO. It only takes 3 minutes for nuclear weapons to get from there to Moscow, right? He said, don't ever mess with the Russian, used to be part of the Russian Empire. ever since Peter the Great. Down there just south of Russia, bordering on the Black Sea, there was a country, an area that Peter the Great took over and made part of Russia. People speak Russian there, right? Don't mess with that country. What country is it?
Ukraine.
The Ukraine. There was a pro-Russian communist regime ruling Ukraine. Somehow, the current government had suddenly the power, and the communist government fled to Moscow. Now there was a pro-Western government in Ukraine, and it was strongly believed that the way they were able to do this so quickly may have had the fingerprints on it of Western countries. Well, this is part and parcel of where we are now. Putin keeps telling people live on speeches broadcast to all of Russia that we're in a fight for our lives. They want to get rid of us. They want to destroy Russia as it now exists. All right. Eventually, somebody wins. There's a sense here that nothing on earth could overcome the imperial beast, especially true after having a mortal wound and coming to life again. False resurrection. The reappearance of an imperial power that succeeds in dominating every nation and person on earth lends credence to their amazement, astonishment, and ultimately their worship. Let me remind you, his power is not the papacy. Well, that's partially based on the idea that the papacy ruled the world in a thing called papal Rome in the Middle Ages. Never happened. All right? And so you can't revive something that didn't have a mortal wound. One, it never happened. Two, it was not mortally wounded. Three, there's nothing to heal. Did I say the papacy was a good power? No, I said it was an evil satanic power. Now note that all of this is an end-time event. The supposed rise and fall of the papacy from AD 538 to 1798 was back in the past. That's where historicists are placing the Great Tribulation. The Great Tribulation is an end-time event. In Revelation, that Great Tribulation, which is unlike anything before it or after it, so there can only be one, being only one Great Tribulation, that's a closing event in human history. It culminates in being shortened, so life will still exist when Christ comes. That is not some series of things that happened in the Middle Ages. Life wasn't in danger of ceasing. Oh, the population lessened in the Black Plague, right? But life on earth was not in danger. How do we know for sure that the rise in universal control of this imperial beast is an end-time event? Does it say so somewhere? Remember, chapter 12 was all about the dragon making war on the woman. This is not the subject of chapter 13. In chapter 13, the issue is about the dragon controlling the lost and how he succeeds at that. Remember the pattern from the 7 assemblies onward and what we saw at the beginning of the 2 witness testimony. They are to use the measuring rod, an obvious symbol of judgment, only on those worshiping at the altar. The outer court of the Gentiles is to be left out during the 42 months, 3.5 times, 1,260 days of their witnessing. So we know that the times are years. Why? Because 3.5 times 12 is what? 3 times 12 is 36, and another half a year is 6. 36 and 6 is what? 42. If we have 30-day months because of the ancient temple's calendar, sacred calendar, then 42 months, or 3.5 years, is 1,260 days. They're all the same thing. By the middle of the week, when the 2 witnesses are martyred, every person has made a final decision for good or evil. So then the subject turns to what happens to the lost in the second half of the 70th week of years. Now, if you don't know anything about Daniel 9, you've never heard of the 70 weeks of years prophecy. You don't know about the 70th week and how it began in the fall of 27, 3.5 years in the spring of 31, Christ is crucified. 3.5 years beyond that, I'm going the wrong way. The probation on the Jews corporately ends, right? Then you see this same time coming up again. You're going to think what?
It never happened.
No. You don't know anything about this. You see this time mentioned before, and now it's mentioned here. What are you going to think? You don't know about Daniel 9. You don't know about Daniel 9:24 to 27. You don't know especially about Daniel 9:27. You don't know anything about the 70th week. You see the same time period here that was mentioned before. What are you going to think? It is what? It is the same. Right? What else would you think if you don't know anything about the previous 70th week? By the middle of the week, when the 2 witnesses are martyred, every person has made a final decision for good or evil. So then the subject turns to what happens to the lost in the second half of the 70th week of years. It is no surprise that after chapters 11 and 12, centering on the righteous, we should see then the subject turn to what happens to the wicked. That's the pattern in Revelation during the second half of the 70th week of years. After the judgment of believers in the 7 messages to the assemblies, we turn to the opening of the seals of judgment on the world. That's the pattern. That's what we're seeing in the rise of the imperial beast, followed quickly by the rise of the beast from the earth. The righteous are nowhere present in chapter 13 except to be brought up that the goal of this is to kill them. It's not about their experience. It's about the experience of the lost. Got it? All right. Are we sure that what we are reading is about the second half of the 70th week? We should be, because that's the pattern we've observed in every passage in Revelation up to this point. Judgment on the righteous first, judgment on the wicked. And the beast was given a mouth, uttering big and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It was allowed to exercise. Right away we find out it isn't because the beast is powerful on its own. Of course, the myriad would-be interpreters of Revelation who know nothing about Daniel 9, 70 weeks of years, and especially the final 70th week, will never figure this out. The 2 periods are exactly the same length and referred to by the same time sets, 3.5 times, 42 months, 1,260 days. It is inevitable that such would-be interpreters will get the 2 halves of the 70th week confused and make a hash out of what Revelation means. Is that clear to everybody? Here we're talking about the second half where, as in Daniel, the evil power is ascended. Second half is described in Daniel 11. When we look at how the 70th week actually worked out historically, the one that happened back from 27 to 34. How did that go? In the first half, John the Baptist and then Jesus Christ influenced the nation. But John was beheaded, and in the exact middle of the week, Christ was crucified. In the second half, his followers were hounded and martyred and scattered. That's how the actual historical 70th week happened. So it's no surprise that this replay of the 70th week is going to be the same way. The big and blasphemous words that the beast exhibits is the usual satanic idea that the Antichrist and his slaves are in fact servants of God, and that God is going to do their bidding. That God is going to do their bidding. They claim power that is only a deception, and in the end will not fix the myriad fatal problems the lost are facing. The Antichrist's whole role is that he's promising he can fix this stuff. And after a bout of nuclear war and half the population dead, people really, 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 to the core of their being, want that to be true. Their desperate claims to authority with God will be unmasked, but too late. In fact, as in Daniel, the Antichrist comes to the point where he implies that he himself is a manifestation of God. It says so right in these chapters. The Antichrist will come to the place where he will tell people this is going to work because he's God. Not that he has God's power, but what? That he is God. Do you see what I wrote here? Remember Domitian? What did Domitian claim?
That he was God. He wanted to be worshipped.
Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. It opened his mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. The Antichrist will make increasingly arrogant and dangerous statements, speaking as if he has God in his back pocket to do his bidding. Well, this kind of speech makes the masses trust that he has things under control. It will increase the loss of life force and the ability to sustain life on earth. The majesty seated in the heavens will not be mocked. In the final stage of the process, Satan will convince the unstable Antichrist that he is God, himself God manifest. Given that it is Satan who is speaking through him, the statements in this verse are hardly surprising. But the lost do not sense the danger, and they ape their master, the Antichrist and his master Satan. Remember that Satan is still at that point promising that he is going to oversee the rapture to heaven at any moment. They're going to get out of this alive. They're going to go to heaven. And then the Antichrist will come, even though while they're worshiping the Antichrist. The imperial beast has gathered the whole world, some as true believers in him, others as slaves, who do what they must do to stay alive, and gathered them under his authority. Where they may be found, some, even at this late time, are martyrs. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. That's what the Bible says. And authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all who dwell on earth will worship it, everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of the life of Lamb who was slain. All who dwell on earth will worship it, everyone whose name has not been written in the book of life. Some manuscripts leave the first sentence above out completely. The sentence only reflects the final push of the demons and their creation, the Antichrist, to rid the world of the righteous. There is no need to omit this sentence. It only says what Revelation says in many other places. Remember, the power over Satan in Revelation is shown in martyrdom. That is its consistent message, reflected in this statement, reflecting what earlier happened to the two witnesses. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. This reminds us of the repeated statement in the message to the assembly spoken by the Spirit. It is, however, commonplace. Jesus often used the ears and hearing or not hearing as a basic definer of the lost versus the saved. Here's a bunch of examples. So at this point, the world is divided between only the saved and the lost among all men with a functioning brain. Many then alive will be too far gone to even understand what's happening. They won't be on the other side because they're too damaged to know what's happening. That's true right now of some of the demons. What is it then that anyone with ears should pay attention to? It turns out to be a proverb about the reversal of fortunes that will accompany the right or wrong choice. The wit in the proverb is that it applies to both groups. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. Right, so there's martyrdom here, isn't there? We're not making this up. With this final provocative proverb, the main body of what the seven-headed beast is about is done for the moment. We'll return to it in detail in chapter 17. For right now, it is important to review. The seven-headed dragon has come down from heaven to the earth plane. The seven-headed beast has arisen from the underworld and climbed up onto the earth plane. In the tripartite cosmos, the action is on the earth plane. Here, the final phase of the war is going to be fought out. Yay! Right where we are. As surely as we hear of a dragon from heaven and a wild beast from the underworld who arrive together, we know what comes next. The dragon, the imperial beast, are mirror images of each other. Both are now on the earth. We, along with our predecessors in Roman Asia, already anticipate what comes next. While heaven and the underworld have been amply represented, we must expect a beast of surpassing significance to represent the earth plane itself in sight of the great final battle. And sure enough, well, this is something that you could, maybe it would burn up, but you could paint in your sleep. Right? Or at least draw.
Yep.
It's virtually certain that there will be people who will come here to learn the truth, who have not seen the cosmos as people in the ancient Near East saw it. That symbolism is, of course, used in Revelation, just as it uses the ancient thought forms about time and space. As most know by now, the upper half is the region of light and life, the lower half of darkness and death. Earth, a floating pancake. You know I had to stop here and
Waffle.
and think about whether I would say pancake or waffle. It's a circle on here, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So I decided, well, we'll go with pancake for this time. And it is on the earth plane that the struggle between the two is played out. Oh, Act 4, Scene 3. Do you like having these scenes separated out?
Absolutely.
Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. Of course, where else would it come from? It had two horns like or resembling a lamb. But it spoke, or actually it's a past participle, has spoken like a dragon. Even before we hear any more, several things are apparent. Now notice, then I saw. Okay? He's not confused here. First, when we saw the seven-headed imperial beast rise, Satan welcomed it from the underworld. Remember, John was being shown all these things on the Day of Atonement, which occurred regularly in September or October. That was the season of the great storms on the Mediterranean. The raging sea coughs up the imperial beast, because the raging, roaring sea is a good image for the wars and tumults that breed the rise and fall of empires. In explaining to John about the imperial beast and the harlot who rides it, the angel says, "The waters that you saw, where the prostitute is seated, are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages." That's what the water symbolizes. It's important to realize that this is what John actually saw. A young lamb with nubbins for horns. An animal's horns are its offensive and defensive weapon. If you see a fully grown sheep, say an elderly male, you get great giant horns. Right? That's a warlike power. This is a peaceful power. It's innocent. Right? Pilate asked Christ, "Are you okay?" He said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were this world, my servants would be fighting." Okay? That's what Pilate wanted to know. He got a direct answer. But it is a therion. That is the Greek term, which is a wild, savage beast. Now take wild, savage beast and look at the picture. If it is actually a wild, savage beast, what do I say? What is happening here? This is a complete deception. This is a lie, right from the first moment.
Dragon in sheep's
And yes, a dragon in sheep's clothing. And that becomes apparent when the Lamb speaks like a dragon. That jumps right over the imperial beast to the source of its power, right? The dragon itself. Another striking thing about the beast from the earth is that it doesn't rise where peoples, multitudes are warring against each other, the normal way for a great power to rise. The beast from the earth is also significantly more precise about its nature. It is no accident that immediately it is described in terms of Revelation's two great spiritual symbols, the Lamb and the dragon. This is not merely a political power. This is a religious power. Further on, we hear about the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. This is later called the false prophet. Being of the earth plane, this new symbol is about something that is of the distinctly mixed nature. Why? Because the earth plane has what? Does it have good in it or evil in it?
Both.
Yeah, that's the nature of where we live. The earth plane is where good and evil meet and fight. It appears on looking that this beast is a young lamb, and it has horns like a lamb, the nubbins. So it must be peace-loving. But it is a beast, a wild, savage animal. The appearance is deceptive. The noun therion has the idea of wild, savage. That fits all these others. It fits all these others. But not initially what we see in this wild, savage beast. But then, suddenly the beast from the earth speaks and immediately reveals itself to be like the dragon. Appearance and reality are in a big fight against each other here. This isn't making one of opposites, right? Okay. Not only is it a mixture, apparently good, peace-loving, gentle, but actually of the dragon's nature, it gathers its power from the imperial beast and the dragon, and what power it has. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. Ah. We were already told every one of the dwellers on earth would worship the imperial beast, whose mortal wound was healed. But now we are told that happens because of the active intervention of the beast from the earth. Hasn't happened yet, but it's happening. As yet, we don't know what the beast from the earth has that gives it the ability to make everyone bow down to the by then universal control of the imperial beast. The ability or quality the beast from the earth has also underlines its already implied strong religious or spiritual powers. Satan had a plan. The imperial beast was basic to that plan. But he had another power he was going to imbue with supernatural abilities. He could do that. He is the prince of the powers of the air. He's got those abilities. to utterly convince the remaining human population to put their total confidence in the imperial beast. It performs great signs. This is not the imperial beast. This is the beast from the earth. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people, and by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. This is new. This is a political power with satanic occult powers. Now let's go back to Paul. Paul warned about the rise of the Antichrist, and he said it would look like this. Let no one deceive you in any way, for that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship. Wow. Do you understand? He exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. If you will turn back, and I think I'll do it myself, you'll turn back to Daniel 11. This is exactly what the prophet Daniel said would happen. We have the same kind of thing described of the Antichrist in Daniel 11. What would have happened then will happen now. It says of the Antichrist in Daniel 11, verse 36, "And the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation of God is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the one beloved by women, the Messianic Christ. He shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. He shall honor the God of force instead of these. A God whom his fathers did not know, he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He will deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god, a strange god. Those who acknowledge him he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers of many and shall divide the land for a price," and so forth. Good. Sound familiar? It's what we have in Revelation. Takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. This is a process. The Antichrist doesn't appear and say, "I'm God." Right? Satan can do that all by himself by imitating the coming of Christ. The coming of the lawless one is by the activity, energes, superhuman or supernatural energetic exertion. This is a word that's never used of any but Satan or God. That's important. Of course, it's the word we get energy from. But in the Greek, it's a superhuman or supernatural energetic exertion of Satan with all power and false, deceitful, lying signs and wonders, with all wicked deception, for those who are perishing, because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. Notice that. Because they refused to love the truth and so be saved. That statement has to be read because of what comes following. Therefore, God sends them a strong delusion so that they may believe what is false, in order that all may be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. All right, now, there's like 0.1% of Christians who know that the Bible says God will send a delusion himself on the lost, right? Doesn't sound like God. Oh, yes, it does. God is a fanatic about one thing: free choice. I know that he's a fanatic about that. I've got the devil right here with me. Right? Why isn't he dead? Lots of people told God, just kill him. And God said, absolutely not. Right? Because he could never achieve what he intends to achieve by that way. Some people would think it over and think, wow, Lucifer spoke against him and he killed him. Right? God's a fanatic about choice. And I know why. Because you can't make anybody love you by force. God wants to be loved. God wants us to love each other. But you can't force that. You can say, this is what I want you to do, but you can't force. That's the whole reason. Why doesn't God reveal himself, people say? Because if he did, that would force your will. It would remove your right to think it over and decide that maybe God doesn't exist. Or if he does exist, there's something basically wrong, because look at the world and look at what we experience. God is a fanatic about free choice. Because free choice is the essential element of love. God is love, John says. If that is true, then God really didn't have a choice about making free choice. If he chooses to be loved, then what? He's got to stand by free choice all the way to the end. Right? Therefore, God sends them a strong delusion so that they may believe what is false, in order that all may be condemned who did not believe the truth but had pleasure in unrighteousness. There's no point in trying to convince somebody who's made a final decision that God is there or that God is good or anything. Right? Right? Jesus made an interesting point when he sent out the disciples the first time. How much reasoning were they to do with people? None. If they receive you, good. If they don't, clap the dust off your sandals and keep on moving. Don't waste any time arguing about a losing proposition and trying to change somebody's will. Right? Jesus did not authorize his followers to waste their time trying to change someone's free will. And you can tell if somebody is set in that and it's not going to change. Right? Clear? Compare what Paul wrote to the Thessalonians to what we see in Revelation about the rise of the Antichrist. The beast from the earth is the individual and the power that Paul was prophesying. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people, and by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the imperial beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. Well, is the Antichrist not a single individual? Well, yes and no. These wild beasts represent great political, religious powers. But note that no great political, religious power ever rose without a powerful leader. Napoleon wrote bitterly about his experience. And you know what he said? They expected me to be another Washington. Right? He wasn't another Washington. He was there to force people. Didn't work. But there couldn't be in America if there hadn't have been a George Washington. He was the classic example of having the right leader, right? The quality of these beasts is expressed in the nature of their leader. It is correct to say that there is the Antichrist, the individual who ultimately claims deity. And there is also the Antichrist power, the great power that rules all the world at the end. You got that? Is it an individual or is it a nation or empire? The answer is yes. 2 chapters we've already referred to often to illustrate the truth. Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28. Give us insight into the relation between the evil human king, Satan, who stands behind. In Isaiah 14, the prophet's talking about Sargon II. Was Sargon a good guy or a bad guy?
Very bad.
Yeah. But in verse 12, suddenly, without warning, the prophet speaks to the god Day Star, son of dawn. The same thing happens in Ezekiel 28, where the king of Tyre, Baal's high priest, is addressed. In verse 13, with no warning, we're talking to the covering cherub who had been in Eden. The downfall and demise of the Antichrist figure then becomes a prophecy of the future doom of Satan himself, and of course his host of demons. We notice that the rise of the individual Antichrist, according to Paul, would be the result of the energeia of Satan. That is the superhuman or supernatural exertion, according to Paul. So what do we have here in Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28? We have Satan, the leader of the vast host of demons, and the earthly king. But the earthly king is a king over an empire, right?
Uh-huh.
It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people, and by the signs that it is allowed to work. Did you notice what Paul said about the rise of Antichrist? He said the men of sin did deceitful miracles. Here the same is said, but significantly we have the signs that it is allowed to work. The signs it is allowed to work. You got that? He does great signs. And where does the power come from ultimately? Well, I'm glad that somebody has caught that. Finally. Do you remember that Revelation introduces Christ as the ruler of kings on earth?
Uh-huh.
To whom all power has been given, in heaven and on earth?
Uh-huh.
Do you understand the significance of why this says repeatedly that it was allowed to do this or that? Right? The signs that it is allowed to work. All power in heaven and on earth had been given to Christ. He dispenses the permission for the Antichrist beast to perform deceitful signs and wonders. But why? Because God is incredibly fanatical about free choice. Paul says that if someone refuses to love the truth, God himself will send that person a strong delusion to make them believe what is false. Since free choice is the most basic constituent of love, God will safeguard free choice above all else, even when the choice leads to eternal death. Signs, wonders, great signs, even fire from heaven. What about the fire from heaven? You remember that after David conquered new territory, you may not know this. After David conquered new territory, including the area around the Carmel Ridge, he sent priest teachers to the area to teach the pagans about the true God. David conquered the area of Palestine that had never been conquered by the Hebrews. So now there were a bunch of people called Israelites who were just pagans. So God sent them, through David, inspired him to send teachers to explain about their new God, the true God. David required that his subjects be able to explain the reasons for their reliance on the new God. Fittingly, An altar to Yahweh is built on Carmel. This bridge way above, 3,000 feet up there, looking down. It gets higher as it goes along, and then you're looking out over the Mediterranean. The great city of Haifa is at the base right now. But it's beautiful up there, incredibly beautiful. One of the things that is, you should look up the pictures. The capital of the B'nai B'rith religion is right there on that side of the Carmel Ridge. It's beautiful. It's like nothing else you've ever seen. But at the time Elijah is doing this, the altar to Yahweh on Carmel had fallen into disuse, since Israel had accepted, for both religious and financial reasons, the worship of the Tyrian Baal. So Elijah set this place as the place for the final showdown. Okay, there's something else that plays in here. It matters that where the Carmel Ridge begins its upward thrust northwestward into the ocean, that we find at its base the city of Megiddo. Yet another reference in Revelation to Har Megiddon, the mountain of Megiddo, which is Mount Carmel. Har Moged, the cosmic mountain. Oh, okay. Have I mentioned that Revelation may have more than one meaning to a symbol? It's on that mountain that Elijah called down fire, proving he served the true God. God answered in fire, a foretaste of the intense thunderstorm that would end the 3.5 years of drought and famine Elijah had prophesied on Israel. Later, the prophet called down fire on heaven on 2 military troops who failed to recognize the danger of attacking the prophet by force. I can fault those 2 guys because that was after what happened on Mount Carmel. What should they have said to the king? They should have said something like this. You're going to kill us if we don't go, but he's going to kill us if we do. Can we at least just go up and ask him without telling him? With 2 harvest seasons every year, 3.5 years meant that 7 harvests had been lost. 7 harvests was the ruin of a rich country. At terrible cost to human and animal life. These events are part of the backstory to the 2 witnesses in chapter 11. And the Antichrist's reversal of the test, using it to convince the world that he is God's instrument, perhaps even divine himself. It would be a masterstroke if Satan could give his men the power to call down fire. It would be Satan giving power to seize what had been used to prove the truth and turn it into a method to prove a lie. Get a chance to look at this more closely when we get to chapter 16, the 7 last plagues, or strokes. It was allowed, here it is again, it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak, and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. I ask you, is there martyrdom after the middle of it? Yes, there is.
Absolutely.
All right? This text has never been correctly interpreted. I've read enough commentaries on Revelation to know this has always been tap danced around. It says what it actually means. First of all, I'm talking to people who are going to hear and then read this book. The people I'm talking to are the Christians of Roman Asia. Did they know what making an image to the beast might be?
Yes.
Did they have any experience with that? An image was an image, an idol. First, understand that the Asian Christians recognized the beast from the earth as another future Roman Empire, rising somewhere else in the world but achieving Rome's goals that were never met. This new Rome-like empire actually would rule the whole world. Its emperor would, in fact, actually be able to exercise life or death control over every person on earth. they would be chagrined, but they certainly recognized what was being talked about. They may never have heard the modern name of the power. It doesn't matter. They understand what it's saying. But what about this mysterious image that is the vehicle the beast from the earth uses to get a universal death decree against the surviving remnant? Did they understand that too? Well, they had spent their whole lives in Asia with images of the empire, Roma, and images of the spirit or genie of the emperor. Images both small and large. People love icons, especially the practice of religion. They got this. Oh, we have all kinds of interpretations of what the image might be. Right? Well, I'm going to say something extremely odd. The image is an image. Adolf Hitler got this. You had that orange eagle holding up the swastika. It was everywhere. He knew how to make an icon, an image. And it, the beast from the earth, was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast. So the image of the beast might even speak and might cause who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. I know why this is so great. Picture an electronic world. I'm going to tell you a science fiction story. Picture an electronic world where everybody could see the same thing at the same time. Okay? Picture that. Now picture that the Antichrist, individual and power, has set up an image just like King Nebuchadnezzar did and said, this is going to be the new god of the empire. In the case in Daniel 3, it was all of gold. Yeah, I know why. Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar, you, singular, you individually, you as an individual are the head of gold, because the founding kings are what is important in Daniel. Okay? And after you will arise an inferior king. That's exactly what Nebuchadnezzar did not want to hear. And it is also the reason that Daniel is not present on this occasion in Daniel 3. He had been made the head of the magicians. He was the very symbol of that dream, which had nearly gotten everybody beheaded. Okay? He was defying that dream. Having Daniel present would have been a great embarrassment to him. But he had his cousins, who were the governors, jointly the governors of the province of Babylon, the heart of the empire. Right? But suppose Nebuchadnezzar had lived in an electronic world where everybody on earth was looking at his image. And suppose he could have made the image come to life. Oh, you're kidding, right? No, I'm not kidding. What does it say here? It was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak. What's it going to speak like? It's going to speak like the beast from the earth. It's going to speak like a dragon. I know what it's going to do. It's the second time in 2 verses that Revelation makes it emphatically clear that these supernatural powers belong to Christ alone, and that he, as the one holding all power in heaven and earth, has allowed this. Evil is not somehow independent of God, even when God is letting it loose. Right? God is not intervening here. He is standing by, letting evil take its course. This great image, a worldwide symbol of the universal world state, is seen and worshipped everywhere on earth. Ray, Can you say electronics? Say it.
Electronics.
Thank you, Ray. This verse contains an awesome prediction, usually passed over vaguely. I have never seen this explained correctly. Revelation is here saying what it means. Now, so the image that Nebuchadnezzar built was a big fellow. What was it, 60 cubits from the base, 6 or 7 stories high? That's a big image. Nebuchadnezzar put a lot of real effort into that, Reggie. And it was spoiled. All right. This verse contains an awesome prediction usually passed over vaguely. It says without any cavil, that's any argument, that the image, once created, will be brought to life by the beast from the earth, exercising its religious occult powers. It will come to life. It will speak. Is that clear? And the lost will obey, overwhelmed with joy that they're going to be safe after all. Well, if you can give this inanimate image life so that it's talking, it's speaking to the people of the world, what does that mean? If you have that much power, then we're going to be saved. We're not going to die. Yeah. I like it. Do you see how shrewd the devil is? He doesn't hit you all at once. What does he do? He builds, he layers his deceptions. Right?
Piecemeal.
Yeah, piecemeal. I like that word. I'll use it from now on. And I'll pretend I thought of it. Yeah. So, as Reggie said, piecemeal, layer by layer. What's happening in this chapter is that the devil is building, right? At this point, the masses of earth are delirious. And it, that is the beast from the earth, was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. That's what this is all about. Now, where are those who would not worship the image of the beast? Where are they? No, that's not the answer. They're all in the wilderness? None of them are in prison? None of them are in dungeons? None of them are in the local jail? And where are prisons and jails? And oh, in cities only?
No.
Right? You're not doing well here. Where are they?
Everywhere.
They're everywhere. That's the answer. Ray's having a hard time here. Where are they, Ray?
Everywhere.
Everywhere. This is a universal decree, Ray.
Yes.
Got it?
Yeah.
So that it might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast, that's all the righteous everywhere, to be slain. Well, we knew this was coming. But there won't be anybody who will raise their hand and say, well, that's awfully harsh and cruel. What will they say? Yes, yes.
Serves you right.
Why is this yes? How can they see that and still deny it? Right? Okay, I've got it. This great image, a worldwide symbol of universal world state, is seen as worshipped everywhere on earth. This verse contains an awesome prediction, usually passed over vaguely. It will come to life. It will speak. And that will be delightful, and everybody will say, let's do it. Let's kill them all. Causes all small and great, rich and poor, free and slave to be marked on the right hand or in the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark that is the name of the beast or the number of its name. Remember, alphabets and numbers are the same thing in the ancient world. A V is a 5, an X is a 10, an L is a 50. Right? That's not just true of Romans. I'm only using Roman numerals as an example because we folks in the Western world, are available to this kind of thing. We can go look at it, right? A lot of people can decipher. Oh, that's 2057. Okay. It comes as no surprise that the beast from the earth controls the world's economy, of course, and that the method of first ridding many of the remnant is simply to let them starve. If that doesn't work with the people of earth totally awed by the beast, the remnant can simply be outlawed and put to death en masse. You know that originally numbers were made from letters of the alphabet, the Roman numerals, for instance. Now we find out that the beast has both a number, which is a name, or a name, which is a number. Right? And the next verse tells us how to discover who that is. Well, as I said, I read somebody today saying, or yesterday, saying, oh, don't waste your time with this. Nobody's ever going to figure this out. It's just meaningless. Revelation misspells Nero's name. And so there's no way to tell who it was really talking about. Maybe it was Nero, but it misspells it. Well, that person was super ignorant because he didn't know that you spell the name one way in the West and another way in the East where you're using Greek. Right? This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and the number is 666. This does not say, don't waste your time. It says that the people to whom Revelation was written, what?
They got it.
By exercising a little wisdom and understanding, they would figure out exactly who was referred to. It says they would know what's being said. Despite later traditions, the Christians would never have compared the number in Latin, the vulgar language of the Romans. Vicarious filii Dei is out. That is not what Revelation would ever do. Nor would they use their native Greek and or Aramaic. Those are the street languages. They're not sacred. The sacred text would be judged by the sacred language, Hebrew. Hebrew letters were also numbers. By computing the trinity of evil, notice how I said that, 666, we can find the name. This isn't about us. It was about the dread Christians had of an emperor possessed by the spirit, the genie of the departed Nero. Note that they are told that by using wisdom and understanding they could and would discover who was behind 666. By using the Hebrew gematria, that is, the numerical values of the letters, we get 666, as long as we spell it the way the Greeks did. In other words, the way Revelation does, for it is a production from the Greek part of the Roman world, and it's written in Greek. Okay, here's the thing. Here are the two sides of the same coin. It is a Sardinian coin, which you remember was scrupulously kept to a uniform weight. The front side on the left is an image of Nero. And counting from the top, you can see, oh, let's do this over here. The back side is over here on the right, and we can see those letters and we can tell what they say. The C, do you see the C down at the bottom?
The C?
Over on the right-hand coin,
Yeah.
the first thing, it looks like a C. It's going uphill.
Yeah.
C.
I see it.
You see the A?
Yep.
The next one that looks like a capital P is an R. That's a rho.
Okay,
That's capital
okay.
rho.
Yeah.
So far we have SAR.
Uh-huh.
What's the triangle? You know this one. Delta. D.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And then comes an I, an A, and N-O-N. Sardinion. Oh, it's a Sardis coin. Remember what the Sardis people were famous with their coins? If it was too light, restrike it. If it was too heavy, file it off. The point of all Sardis coins wasn't whether they were struck beautifully, but what?
They were the correct weight.
They were all the correct weight. So over here on the right-hand side, I have a photo of Nero. Not a photo. Well, I have a photo of Nero. This is a photo. And it says, the C down there, I can just barely see it, but I can see it. A-I-S-A-R.
That's
Caesar.
that's an S?
C's are S's. Circus.
Yeah, okay.
Cent. Civil.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. Over here, we had Sardinian. What's the first thing? It looks like a C over
Yeah,
on
it
this
looks like a
side.
C,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Now the part that's important to us is the behind. What's behind Nero's head? Start at the top. N, E,
R,
R, O,
N.
N.
Neron.
It's sliding off the bottom, but it's there.
Mm-hmm.
I can see that it's an N.
Yeah, it's been
The
worn away.
Sardinians did not fail to understand how to spell Nero's name. They were a great Greek city. They're not going to spell it like the vulgar Latins. You've got to understand, the Greeks thought that they were much superior to the Latins. It's the reason that French people think Americans are vulgar. Doesn't matter about your power. What?
English.
No, it's just that you people act like boors when you come to France. You are embarrassing. A book was written called The Ugly American about how Americans are perceived overseas, right? All right, so here we are. The front side on the left is an image of Nero, and counting from the top behind his head, you see the N-E-R. The thing looks like a capital P is actually an R, then an O, and falling off the lower left is the final N. The coin identifies the image as Neron. The N's are 50 each in Hebrew. Okay, you got that? We're using Hebrew. Without that final N, you would end up with 616, which spoils the 666. But manuscripts in the West, where the final N would not be used, regularly show the number as 616. That's how we know that thereby everyone who read Revelation or copied it understood that Nero was being identified. You will find a footnote to the 616 reading in most Bibles. Even if it says 666, it's going to have a footnote, and the footnote is going to say, as this does, some manuscripts read 616. So Nero and his vicious persecution became the symbol of the final Antichrist. The legend that Nero's spirit would rise again in another emperor certainly struck a chord with the Christians in Asia about Domitian. But we have one last exegetical task, okay? We're going to say this one thing. Nero did not persecute a whole bunch of people. He did not persecute Christians emperor-wide. When Rome burned, he needed somebody to, the story came that Nero fiddled while Rome burned and made people furious. And he said, well, go after the Christians. They set the city on fire because they hate mankind. Right? And so then Nero did things like Tacitus tells us, or is it Suetonius? I know that I get confused about which one said what, but they were contemporaries. But in any case, this is what happened. I think it was Tacitus. Nero took Christians and he crucified them, a whole bunch of them. And he covered their bodies in pitch, thick from top to bottom. And then he lit them on fire to light his garden parties. Okay. And now that I think about it, I'm sure it is Tacitus, who says this was the kind of thing he was doing. And he was so vicious and so vile and so cruel that eventually popular opinion relented in favor of the Christians. That's how Nero got to be the symbol of the Antichrist. Not huge numbers, not emperor-wide, but because of who he was, how he did this. So now we have one last exegetical task. Who is this mysterious beast from the earth, so deceptive and being so successful at it? This political power rises after all the other great empires and brings about the last great persecution of the saints. We find in it a strikingly religious nature, but a mixed bag of good and evil that is powerfully deceptive. It appears innocent but vicious and evil. It is both the last great power to rise and also the most successful. Its career belies its Christian origins, for in fact it speaks like Satan. It is a power of great religious authority that superseded anything the papacy ever succeeded at, for it controls all mankind in the end. It becomes a great empire where there never had been an empire before, growing great with an initially small people. The current candidates are China and the United States. One of them fulfills every identifier, the other fulfills none of them. Right? Got it? Look, the Constitution of the United States is the greatest thing that ever happened, the greatest political event in human history. Right? And it was written and signed by a lot of people who took part in vicious slavery, right? Virginia said, we're the biggest, we have more people than anybody else. We've got to build roads, we've got to build canals, we've got to do all sorts of stuff. We need our fair share of the federal money that's going to come to the federal government. There's lots of stuff we're going to need. And so we couldn't sign this the way it is. And so the others said, well, what do you want? We said, we want our slaves to be counted too. They're people who have to be taken care of. And what did the Constitution say? Slavery is evil?
No.
No. It said, okay, we'll count your slaves, but they're not human beings.
3/5.
Each slave is 3/5 of a person. That's about what would be right about the Negroes. The Negroes would be, the Africans would be 3/5 of a human being, right? The question about whether Congress could support the Emancipation Proclamation was the question of, do you people who support this, are you saying that the blacks are human beings? That was a huge fight in Congress. Okay. From the beginning, there was a mixture. You understand? And the bad part of the story is often suppressed. You'll never hear about it. Right? You won't hear about how outraged the Congress was that this Emancipation Proclamation implied that these people were human beings. Right? That was a non-starter. Right? Nope. So there is the mixture. Did China come last after all the others? Is it a mixture of good and evil? Nothing like the American Constitution existed in China at any time. I have to say that if you look at China as a political power, it is evil. What did I not say?
Good.
It's not a mixture of good and evil. It is evil. It persecutes anyone who accepts any other authority than itself, and always has. Nope, doesn't fulfill the identifiers. The other one does. Okay, now look at that. We are at the end of the story. Right? Yeah. All right, I hope you learned something today. Let's tell the people that the Lord is going to take care of them. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and give you peace.
Amen.